Hello everyone, I'm Gail Carillo and I'm a licensed associate broker with Coldwell Residential Brokerage. When asked to present here tonight, I started to evaluate what would be the best approach to bring you the most valuable information and condense it into a 15-minute session. And then it dawned on me to find out what is in the minds of the consumers, and that's precisely what I did. I went out and I interviewed a group of consumers and a group of real estate professionals, and I asked them both the same pointed question. What is your perception of the market conditions in the real estate industry today? And the results were very interesting. What I found is that there was a lot of diversity, but there was two common threads. Okay. One thing that was totally in common across the board was that there was a lot of confusion. And quite frankly, amongst the consumers, it was pretty rampant. The other common thread was that there was strong and passionate and convictive, yet different opinions from the real estate professionals. And I said to myself, no wonder why everybody is so confused. And it got me to thinking about a concept called the science of thinking, and an author who has a quote that I love and live by. And that quote says, the hardest thing to do is to escape from one's own viewpoint. So in keeping with that line of thinking, I'm going to ask you to take a look at the photograph I have up on the screen. I want you to take a 30-second mental break and take a look and make a note of what it is that you're seeing. Okay. Everybody ready? Okay, good. I'm not going to ask you what your answers are, but I'm going to venture to say that some of you see a glass that is half full, and some of you see a glass that is half empty. And I'm going to tell you that you're both right. How can that be? There's one picture, two very different answers, and they're both right. How can that be? It's all about perception. So let's talk a little bit about perception. Before we do that, someone with an optimistic opinion will view the glass as half full and the many ways that glass of water can be beneficial. Someone with a negative opinion will view the same glass of water as half empty and will not see the benefits that the glass of water can provide. So in keeping with that mindset, I want you to keep an open mind through this presentation as I talk about market conditions, and stretch yourselves, if you already have a viewpoint, to see past it. Market conditions and perceptions. By a show of hands, can you tell me how many people think there's good news in the real estate market? Good. How many people think there's bad news in the real estate market? Okay, like the glass of water, everyone is right. So for the sake of this presentation, I'm just going to call it the news. Before we talk about market conditions, let's talk about how perceptions are acquired. When I was doing my interviews, I kept hearing something. I heard and everyone's saying. And I said to myself, but who's everyone? Is everyone the economists who study the market and forecast? Is it the bankers and the Wall Street professionals? Or is it your friends, your neighbors, your store clerks, and most guilty, the newspapers and other media? Let's talk about newspapers and other media. Newspapers are opinions with some facts filtered in. I also want to call your attention to newspaper headlines. Oftentimes we'll see a headline and it may read something like this: housing prices dropped by 5%. And in our hurried and busy lives, we don't take the time to read the body of that article. But we have internalized that and said, my house just dropped 5%. When in fact that article could have been a national statistic and it may not have affected you or your town at all. The other thing is, newspapers in the business, their agenda is to sell papers. And what sells papers? Drama sells papers. And we're seeing a lot of drama. Just keep in mind, when you're reading the papers or you're watching the news, it's often a one-sided, biased opinion. It is from all of these things that our perceptions are acquired, internalized, often believed, and subsequently spread. But we, as real estate professionals, we live it. We have our finger on the pulse of the market. So I want to talk to you about what I believe are the true market conditions. On this list, I have some negative market conditions. Unemployment rates are up. I don't think anybody could discount that. I personally have two friends that have been in the market looking for a job for in excess of a year. So unemployment rates are clearly up. The buyer pool is smaller. It is absolutely smaller than the buyer pool we saw in 2004 to 2006. That's a fact. Mortgages are more difficult to get. The banks were giving out money like it was candy. They've stopped. Houses are selling for less. They are. And inventory is in abundance. Now I want to take you over to see the positive market conditions. I want you to note that on my positive market conditions list, everything in green was extracted from the negative list. And I'm going to show you how all of those things are truly positives. There's only one line item on this slide that's different from what I just showed you as a negative. Okay? Interest rates are at historic lows. The buyer pool is smaller. We just talked about that. But let's see what that really means. Buyer pools ebb and flow, and they traditionally look like this. They ebb, they flow, they ebb, they flow. And then there was this big bubble. This was the bubble of 2004 to 2006. And do you know what this is? It was liberal lending, and it created this huge falsified buyer pool. And now we're starting to see this again. The market is not bad. The buyer pool is not bad, and it's not small. It's corrected. It's healthy. This was an unhealthy buyer pool. Mortgages are more difficult to get. Absolutely. But is that really a bad thing? Back in the peak of the market, everybody was getting a pre-approval. But many of them didn't make their way to the closing table. That's number one. And many of them that did are now foreclosing on their houses. So now you could rest assured that because mortgages are more difficult to get, the buyers that are showing up with pre-approvals now are definitely more qualified than the buyers you saw in that false buyer pool. This is my favorite thing in my presentation. Houses are selling for less. I bet you can't imagine how I could say that this is a good thing, but it truly is. My artistry is not that great, so bear with me. To make the point, this is a little sailboat, and this is my big yacht. And the little sailboat has a value, and the big yacht has a value. These are the water. When the water tables drop 10%, both vessels drop at the same rate, regardless of their value. But in real estate, it's different. I need an assistant. Okay.
Is that a cue?
No, I'm good. Okay. Now let's look at what that means in real estate language. Okay? Here's a more modest house at $300,000. And here's a house that you want to trade up to at $500,000. Unlike the water tables, when the real estate market drops at 10%, both do not fall at the same rate. This $300,000 house that dropped 10% is now worth $270,000. This $500,000 house that just dropped 10% is now worth $450,000. So what happened here? This seller says, woe is me, I just lost $30,000 on my house. But really what happened is, the house they're looking to buy just came down $50,000. This seller who thought they lost $30,000, saved $50,000, they're up $20,000. This is the perfect market to trade up in.
That's awesome.
Okay. Inventory is in abundance. How could that be a good thing? Back in the peak of the market in 2004 to 2006, supply and demand was such that buyers were fighting over properties. And the result of that is that many of them overpaid. There were bidding wars and they overpaid. Now, if you successfully price your house and get it sold, there is an abundance of choices for you. And you're not at risk of overpaying or battling over a house. There's plenty of inventory. It's a positive. It's not a negative. Okay, let's talk a little bit about pricing, because pricing is key. When I was polling the real estate brokers, a real estate manager, told me that every Monday morning he walks into his office and he says to the first agent, he says, good morning, how was your open house yesterday? And agent A says, I ran an ad, I exposed it, I sat there, I wasted 2 hours of my time, nobody came, it was miserable, I'm miserable. He says, okay. He walks over and he goes over to agent B. Good morning, how was your open house today? Agent B says, I advertised it, I exposed it, it was wonderful. I had 14 people walk through the door, and I have 3 offers on the property. One might say, what is the difference from agent A and agent B? And one might think it's attitude, but it's not attitude. Because had Agent A had the same experience as Agent B, she or he would have a great attitude. The one difference between those two scenarios, because both of them have good marketing plans and both of them have exposure, is price. That is the only difference from Agent A's experience and Agent B's experience. So let's talk about how value is determined. Now, I'm not talking about the cost approach or the comparable sales approach. I'm talking about two basic styles of determining value, and they are emotional or rational. In my opinion, there's nothing else. You price emotionally or you price rationally. Emotional pricing is when you have the concept that you put $20,000 of improvements into your house so that your house then must be worth $20,000 more. Sadly, that's a myth. Improvements are for your enjoyment. You may get limited value for those improvements, and it may do one other thing. It may help you sell your house faster because it will appeal to the consumer. But from a value standpoint, if you have upgraded appliances or you have granite countertops, I hope that you enjoy them because it will not add that much value to your real estate. The next one's a biggie, and I don't mean to be disrespectful, and I'm very, very sensitive to a seller and what they need. But we as real estate professionals hear this quite often. But I need this. And with all due respect, it has no relevance whatsoever on what the market will bear for your home. A house is worth what somebody is willing to pay for it. Rational pricing. That's when you use the comparable sales approach. Pricing is based on lot size, location, square footage, and condition. Rational pricing is based on understanding the appraisal process and that we need to sell that house a second time to the bank. There has to be 3 comparable sales within a mile within 6 months, or we're going to get a short appraisal. And most importantly, to know and to realize that your house, again, is worth what the market will bear. Mistakes and risks that sellers are making. Very common. We're almost past this hurdle right now, but they're waiting for the spring. I always tell my clients that waiting for the spring is a mistake. The competition is already fierce. We're saturated with inventory. We're going to be drowning in it. If you wait for the spring, it's only going to get that much worse. Anybody who's dredging around in the dregs of winter is a serious buyer, and you may be missing that opportunity. So please don't wait. There's a lot of other risks with regards to waiting for the spring, but let me go through them. Another mistake sellers make is they often chase the market. And what that means is that they say, I know that my house is probably worth this, but I want to price it here because I need wiggle room. In real estate, there is no such thing as wiggle room, and all that does is hurts a seller. If your house is worth $360,000 and you insist on putting it up for $400,000 because you need wiggle room, what will happen is 45 days later you'll come down to the $360,000 and the buyer will no longer pay you $360,000. Now you're at $350,000. Why? Nobody's offering you full price on a house that's been on the market for 45 days. There's another risk with that. If you price it at $400,000 and it's worth $360,000, the $400,000 buyer comes in, and as lovely as it is, they're going to leave without making an offer because $400,000 can buy them something more in today's market. Timing the market. That's people that are waiting for it just to be just perfect. You know, there's a lot of controversy. Have the prices stopped falling? Not really sure. In my opinion, no. I think they're still coming down. Once they come down, they need to stabilize. Once they stabilize, that pendulum needs to swing back up. All of that takes a lot of time. It's a lot of years. So I would highly recommend not waiting to time that market perfectly, unless you're willing to stay in your house for a period of probably 6 to 8 years. This is a biggie. Increase in mortgage rates. This is a big, big risk. And we have somebody here talking on mortgage, so I'll make this quick. If the mortgage rates go up 1%, you have lost 10% borrowing power as a purchaser. Whoops. On this graph, it shows you at 4.5%, a buyer is approved for a mortgage of $300,000. If those, let me get my little pointer. If those rates go up 1 point to 5.5%, the same buyer who afforded $300,000 can now afford, because of 1 point, $268,000. They lost $30,000 in borrowing power because those rates kicked up 1 point. I think if I can impress anything upon you, it's the fact that the interest rates going on the rise is your biggest enemy, and that is predicted to happen in the near future, right? Well, we'll talk to Matt, we'll talk about that. Okay. Okay, starting to sum things up. We talked about rational pricing and emotional pricing, but now let's talk about impact pricing. And I used to talk about the first 30 days, but now it's become even more critical. We talk about the first 14 days. When you're putting a price on your house, you want to attract to the buyer's mentality. The buyers that are out there have exhausted the inventory, they've seen everything, they're pre-approved, ready, willing, able, and anxious to buy. You want to put a price tag on your house that screams at the buyer, what is it going to take for me to get this house? That's what you want to do. But most of the time, sellers will instead put a price on it that says, let's try this and see if they'll take it. Houses are selling. People are saying houses aren't selling. They are absolutely selling. This house in Longwood School District listed for $249, sold at $265, 35 days on the market. In Patchogue, Medford, $339.9, sold $339.9, days on the market, 23. And just to make the point, Station School District, $319.9, sold for $327, days on the market. So please don't let anybody tell you that houses aren't selling. There's houses that are sitting on the market and expiring because their prices are not reflective of the market that we're in today. So I ask you, how would selling your home improve your quality of life? Fear of the unknown often keeps us stuck. Making no decision because you are afraid to take a risk, you are actually taking the biggest risk of all. I created what I call a quality of life train. And on this quality of life train, there is a potential right now for less debt. There is a potential for more space in a home or less space in a home. There is a potential to be closer to family and friends, for more property or less property, to improve your daily living, eliminate stairs if your health doesn't call for them, or get rid of lawn maintenance. But most of all, there's an opportunity on this train for dreams fulfilled. Right here, right now, on March 10th, 2011, this train is ready to leave the station. Right here, right now, you are surrounded by a group of talented, knowledgeable, professional conductors that are willing to see that you have a safe and smooth ride. If I haven't convinced you that it is a good time to sell, and it is a phenomenal time to sell and buy, we're going to stick around after for questions and answers, and I'm hoping at that time we can convince you to get on board. Thank you.